Okay, cool. So we're going to get started. Thank you everyone for joining today. Today we're here to talk about a new report that we just came out with called the 2018 State of Code Review. So we're going to dive in. First off, some quick introductions. I am one of your co-hosts, Patrick Londa. I'm a marketing manager here at SmartBear. And I'm joined today by Jonathan Fortunati, who's a sales engineer also for Collaborator.
Good afternoon, everybody.
All right, so I'm not sure different levels of familiarity with SmartBear, but for those who might not be totally familiar, SmartBear, we're a leader in software quality tools for teams. We have a portfolio of different point solutions across the software development lifecycle, whether you're trying to do code reviews and document reviews. We have a tool called Collaborator that we'll talk about a little bit later on today. We also have a suite of API tools like SOAP UI Pro, Swagger Hub, really all across your software development lifecycle, from design to deployment, we have tools that can help you meet different challenges. So let's get into a bit of an agenda for today. So we're going to start off, we're going to walk through the key findings, what things stood out from the initial sort of drawing of data, what things have changed. For those who might not be aware, the State of Code Review is a benchmarking survey. So that means that we have previous years of data to draw on. So we're able to get a sense of trends in the industry. So we'll be going through some of that today, things that really stood out. And then we'll be talking about the code review process and perceptions of that process. And then we'll be talking about the development stack in 2018, the team firmographics and beliefs of the folks that we surveyed, recommendations for your team, and then we're going to wrap up just briefly showing Collaborator, which is our code and document review tool. So just to level set, when we launched this survey initially, it was last February of 2018. We ran that survey until April. So we were able to hear from over 1,100 software professionals about what their code review process looks like, what their software development looks like in general, perceptions on their process. So we have a ton of data to work off of. So let's dive right in with key findings. One of the big headlines, satisfaction with code quality and timely releases are both on the decline. Not seismically, but consistently. So since 2016, you've seen fewer developers and software professionals fully satisfied with the code that they're bringing to market. So you can see in 2016, you had over 50% agreeing that they were satisfied with their code quality. And that's dropped pretty consistently in the last couple of years. I think the good news is that overall, the majority of software professionals are satisfied with the code that they're delivering or helping to deliver. But that trend, I think, does sort of speak to the level of software complexity out there in the market right now. Software is being asked to do more things with the API economy. You also have cybersecurity concerns that are more prevalent than ever. And then you also have the agile development movement, which is encouraging teams to do more frequent releases. So I think with all these things combined, we're seeing people being less satisfied with the software that they're developing, or fully satisfied because the burden of what software is supposed to accomplish consistently is rising. And then releases, folks are not able to get releases out on time to the same degree that they have previously. Again, not a seismic shift, but a steady one. And this doesn't take into account frequency of releases. It's possible that teams are releasing more frequently and maybe not able to get releases out on time as a result of just having more volume of releases. So they have a little bit more flexibility there. So I think we'll probably be able to get more information on this in future years as we build out what exactly a release schedule looks like and add more questions around this area. Today, or rather this year, we added a new question to the survey. This one is, are you satisfied with your team's current code review process? Historically, we've asked about frequency and approach, and we'll get into that. But I think this year we wanted to get a sense of how folks feel about their process. The sort of most popular answer was that folks were in agreement that they were satisfied with their process. About 30% said that they were neutral. It's sort of like, how satisfied are you with your laundry process? I mean, I think some folks have the notion that, like, it does the job. It's good enough. It works. And then we did see about 27% say that they were not satisfied with their code review process, or either not satisfied or very not satisfied. So the purpose of including this, yes, we wanted to get a sense of how satisfied folks are with their process, but this also allowed us to segment and increase the quality of the analysis that we were able to do, so that we're able to segment out by folks who are satisfied with their process and folks who are not satisfied by their process, and draw some conclusions about what might be a leading indicator as to a team's satisfaction there. So we'll get into that a little bit later in the report. And then for this question, what's the number one thing a company can do to improve its code quality? For the third straight year, code review is the number one item identified by developers and software professionals as the number one way to improve code quality. Unit testing, that's been number two the last 3 years as well. So there's some consistency to these reports, obviously, as benchmarks. The opinion on code review being the number one and unit testing being number two, that's been pretty consistent. There's been some variation on the other items, but not really significant in any sort of trend, one way or the other. And then as a result of us taking that metric of code review satisfaction, we were able to line that up also with code quality satisfaction, that first measure that we showed at the start of the key findings section. And we found that satisfaction with your code review process is very, very strongly correlated with satisfaction with your overall code. So this might seem obvious, but given all of the different components that we looked at, those two factors were the ones that correlated the most. So with that said, if you can get more satisfied with your code review process, you're more likely to end up satisfied with your end code. So now we're going to talk about the code review process and perceptions about that process. So we asked, how often do you participate in these common code review approaches? Historically, and across the industry, there's sort of three categories of approaches that we look at. One is tool-based. So that could be anything from a GitHub pull request to Crucible or Collaborator or one of these pure code review tools. Really anything that a team considers tool-based on their own approach. It even could be something of some sort of MacGyvered process through Slack or through email. There's meeting-based approaches. I think these are sort of the oldest approach to trying to do these code reviews, where teams will sit down in a room for a number of hours going over code line by line. I know some teams still do this, and there's different use cases for each of these approaches, but that's one that we looked at. And then also ad hoc. Well, and what we mean by that is sort of over the shoulder reviews. So stopping by someone's desk or, just asking briefly about one thing or another. So what we found is tool-based approach that had the most daily reviews, the most frequent review frequency. And then weekly, ad hoc was the next most common. So weekly and ad hoc are really the high frequency approaches. And then meeting-based reviews are either weekly or bi-weekly for the most part, and persist as you widen the scope. So it's possible you might not do a code review meeting every week, but most teams try to meet on these things to make sure everyone's in alignment. So we also looked at document review as well. As part of your development process, code reviews are really important, but code reviews often depend on that team coming to a consensus on the requirements or the sort of user story beforehand. So we also wanted to look at that. When we found that 90% of teams or respondents are conducting document reviews of some kind, so reviewing one of these kinds of items or artifacts. And what was interesting is we found that of the folks who were satisfied with their code reviews and their review process, I think the number was 2.1 types of documents. So the folks who are doing, who are satisfied with their process are reviewing 2.1 types of documents. That's maybe a requirements document and a test case, well, for example. And the teams that are not satisfied with their process, they only review on average 1.7 types of documents. So it's maybe not entirely tangible to sort of think about, but from a broad big picture perspective, the teams that are doing document review are much more likely to have a satisfactory code review process and therefore satisfaction with their overall code quality. So we asked, what are the most important benefits of code review? Number one is improved software quality. That's been the case every year that we've asked this. Number two is sharing knowledge across the team. This is a really big one. I know a lot of teams use code reviews as a way to onboard new members of their team. So they'll be able to join, get a sense of the code base, what are the styles and conventions that our team or that our organization is using. And you can see that as the third most popular item after that. And ability to mentor. So all of those are sort of wrapped up in the same sort of notion that code reviews allow this collaboration and this knowledge sharing to ultimately improve the skill set of the team. So there were some on this slide that did increase over the year compared to last year. And I think there were no categories that decreased significantly, but there were categories that increased significantly. So this is the list of those categories. These are benefits of code review. I think what is reasonable is that folks are starting to get a sense of additional benefits that come with code reviews, specifically ISO or industry certifications, internal audits, really understanding code reviews as a multifaceted technique to improve both your code quality, but also regulatory compliance and your team's ability to put forth quality code. We looked at business drivers that determined a need for a code review tool. This is pretty repetitive given the previous question. Again, improving code quality is the #1 priority. And then internal audits, regulatory compliance, external audits, all those pop up as priorities as well. We looked at what obstacles prevent you from doing any type of code review. The most popular one was workload. The idea that I have too much work on my plate. There's no way that I can get to a review right now on helping someone else with their code when I have a bunch of projects stacked up. And related to that, I think our deadlines and time constraints. We'll talk a little bit about that later regarding sort of the impact of code reviews on timelines and deadlines in general. But one interesting thing to note, the lack of manpower and the location of team members have both been declining as factors that are obstacles to code reviews. So I think part of that is that teams are becoming more global. A lot of reviews that are being done either remotely or just virtually. So lack of manpower and location of team members are on the decline there. So we had 11,000 software professionals who responded. So I thought, or historically, we've been asking, what tool sets are you using? What things, systems do you have that you're leveraging to put forth your code? So first question we asked was, what software configuration management system do you or your company currently use? So not a ton of change year over year. We've seen that Git is still the most popular SCM on the market that teams are going towards. Subversion has been on the decline in recent years. It used to be a third of respondents were saying that they were using Subversion, and now it's roughly 24%. And there's also a decline for Microsoft TFS. I think the GitHubs and GitLabs and Bitbuckets of the world are really making Git development a lot easier and popular across the industry. But we are still seeing other SCMs like Perforce, CVS, Mercurial, AQRev. There's a whole slew of other SCMs that are being used that still have a place in the market, but they're just really out or overshadowed right now by Git and Subversion, and those most popular ones there. So speaking of GitHub and Bitbucket and GitLab, we found that 54% of respondents are using GitHub, whether that's the free version or the enterprise version. That's the majority of the market. So I think that's pretty impressive. We found 30% of respondents are not using any repository management tool. Bitbucket is sitting at around 28% of responses. And then GitLab is in third as far as those repository tools go. But that we ran this survey prior to the GitHub acquisition. So I'm sure there's probably some difference now if we were to run it of teams potentially migrating to a different tool. I know there was a lot of buzz about that. Unclear if anyone actually moved. So as far as requirements management goes, the primary tool for that, as it has been in past years as well, it's still Jira by Atlassian. But you should note that the next four options in popularity are Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, and Team Foundation Server and SharePoint. So while Jira has the most popular tool for requirements management, Microsoft has more of a market share because they just have more tools that are being used by teams. And then integrated development environments. Number one, Visual Studio, 45% of respondents. Eclipse is a close second. IntelliJ is third. That's sort of been the lineup in past years as well, as far as order goes. And then we had NetBeans, which is used by 11%, and Xcode, which is used by 9%. So I want to draw your attention to one thing real quick, which is Visual Studio, that's owned by Microsoft. Word, Excel, Team Foundation Server, SharePoint, that's a Microsoft property, and now GitHub. So you're starting to see Microsoft dominating a lot of these different tool categories. So how they move forward with that, I think will be interesting to see. But just something to note there. And then we also asked, what kinds of tools teams are using for their code reviews. So there's sort of those repository tools that we talked about with GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. You can do code reviews through there by sending pull requests. A lot of teams do that depending on their use case. You also have the kind of code reviews that are in IDEs. So Visual Studio has a code review capability. And then some folks bring in static analysis when they think of code reviews. So SonarQube was a really popular tool that teams are using for that as well. And then there's sort of this core pure code review tool category. These are tools that are dedicated to empowering code reviews. Repository management tools can do code reviews. IDEs can do code reviews. This category of tools is ones that are dedicated and meant to empower code reviews. So that's sort of where most of their horsepower sits. So the most popular tool in that category, we were glad to see, is Collaborator by SmartBear, with about 10% of the responses. Crucible was another popular one by Atlassian that had 6%. Review Board is a free tool online that had about 4%. And then also at 4% is Garrett, which I believe started as a Google venture. And then there's a few other code review tools that are in the mix there. All right, so now we're going to look at team firmographics and beliefs. So this is sort of who made up the survey. You know, what are there any areas of bias in some of this data, or you know, what are the trends from a team standpoint? So one of those main trends is the size of development teams. I think across the industries are changing. Year over year, it looks like 6 to 10 folks on a development team is becoming a lot more popular than it has in previous years. There's been a steady increase towards that size. At the same time, you're seeing a decrease in teams of more than 50 people. So I think there's a number of different ways that you can interpret this. One way that we are interpreting this is that as a lot of teams become more agile minded, maybe not moving fully to an agile approach, but in order to be very collaborative, cross-functional, a lot of those teams would, you can't really do agile with a team of 50 or more people, I don't think, or at least if you were, it would be a lot more difficult. But 6 to 10 is a really nice number. 1 to 5, you're not seeing as much. I think when you're on a team that size, there's a lot more dependency and risk with each member. So the chance of someone knowing a certain part of the code base and being the only person who knows that part of the code base is a lot higher if you have a really small team. But with 6 to 10 people, that's becoming the sort of standard team size. So we also looked at the total number of employees at your company. So this was pretty even across the board. We saw a pretty equal distribution. So it's not that this survey is only representing gigantic companies. The companies here are pretty spread out there. These are the main industries that we looked at or that we heard from. Computer software, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. It's possible that they're working for firms that are producing software for other industries, sort of tangentially. But in total, we ended up hearing from about 35 different industries. So that other category is pretty large. As far as trends in the industry, we wanted to see what folks thought of no-code, low-code development. For folks who aren't fully familiar, and I'm not an expert on this, but I think the general notion is that it's taking a more visual approach to coding. So trying to have more of a building block approach than using thousands of lines of code. And there's different tools that enable this kind of development. So it's been in a lot of articles. There's a lot of folks writing about it. So we were curious what the adoption of it was. We saw only 18% of respondents said that they were currently using it or considering using it. We had 40% say they were neutral. It's possible some of those folks were maybe unfamiliar with what exactly this is. And then we had 45%. So the majority of the responses said, nope, we're sticking with what we're currently doing. All right, so this final section is on recommendations. We had a ton of data. It's a 30-question survey, 1,100 software professionals. So the data points that we were able to draw on were pretty significant. So as a result of that, here are, we'll say, 7 recommendations that you can think about and sort of take back to your teams. So number one, don't worry about what repository management team or what repository management tool your team is using. At least with respect to code reviews, it's possible that you do want to evaluate it from a strategy perspective. But what we found was that, you can see it in this graph here, when we broke it out by folks who were satisfied with their software quality versus unsatisfied with their software quality, the repository management tools had negligible impact. So the folks who were not using any tool at all, the same number or percent of them were satisfied versus unsatisfied. What we saw was that these repository management tools are not providing any meaningful advantage from a software quality perspective versus teams that were not using them. So take this with a grain of salt. Each team is different. Each team might have different value in using a repository management tool. But what we found was that there was not a significant difference in software quality satisfaction between teams using one or not using one at all. Number two is conduct code reviews on a daily basis. What we found here was for the folks who are conducting any type of code review on a daily basis, that they're on the right of this chart, and then the folks who are satisfied with their overall software quality are on the top. So you see this strong correlation. The teams that conduct frequent reviews are more likely to be satisfied with their software quality. So that's a pretty strong correlation. If your team is only doing reviews maybe on a biweekly basis, this is something that you might want to consider of, hey, let's increase our frequency. There's good justification for that. And there's a decent chance we're going to have more satisfaction with our software quality as a result. Number three is think of code reviews as a time saver. So when we asked about obstacles, a lot of folks said that the workload and the sort of time that it took to do reviews was preventing them from going in and getting those reviews done. We found code reviews actually are a net time saver when you consider if you're able to find defects early, you can reduce your rework. So this chart on the right shows that the folks conducting frequent reviews are also more likely to get their releases out on time. And so I think that speaks to code reviews being a driver of faster time to market. And then the teams that are able to get their releases out on time, in the chart on the left, they're more likely overall to be satisfied with their code quality. So there's a lot of bubbles, but all the ones in the top right are indicators that these things are correlated, and that ultimately the teams that are doing code reviews more frequently are able to get their releases out faster or more reliably, and then ultimately not have to sacrifice any sort of code quality. They're actually more satisfied with their overall code quality. So number four would be conduct tool-based reviews. We are a software tool company, so this may sound a little bit biased, but this is the data that we're basing it off of. We looked at how often do you participate in a tool-based code review process. So the folks who were satisfied with their software quality, you see significantly are more likely to be conducting reviews on a daily and weekly basis in a tool. The folks who are not satisfied with their software quality and who are never using tool-based reviews, you can see on the right-hand side of that chart, that's a gigantic gap. The folks who are not doing tool-based code reviews are much more likely to be unsatisfied with their software quality. So, that could be a number of reasons. It's possible that maybe they don't have a budget for adopting a code review tool. Maybe there's not significant managerial buy-in. But that's what our data found. So if you need help persuading a manager or securing budget, feel free to share the report. Number five, set clear expectations for both code and document reviews. What we found was that when the reviewer fully understands their expectations so on the right of that chart, they are much more likely to be satisfied with their overall software quality. I think that makes sense, right? You know, if someone knows what they're expected to do on a review, they're able to go in. That probably means that there's been a document review or at least consensus around what the objective of the project is. There's good communication. So setting expectations and providing a good baseline for communication, that's something that is shown to be a leading indicator as to someone's satisfaction with software quality overall. Number 6 is, I think, was initially surprising when I came across it, but it's actually used tool-based reviews in conjunction with meeting-based reviews. So I think the important thing is that the tools that you're using can be really powerful and can enable you to conduct remote reviews and document your process and automate some of your process as well. But what it doesn't enable all the time are those face-to-face interactions, those meetings that can actually prove to be really helpful. So we found for this one that teams who never performed meeting-based code reviews, only 28% of them are satisfied with their code quality, while 48% are dissatisfied. So the teams that that do perform meeting-based reviews, much more satisfied with their overall code quality because they're able to have those face-to-face conversations. All right, and then we have one more. Let's see, we have a question that just came in. So setting expectations, is it more of a general baseline on team or level or per review? Okay, yeah, I think that's a good question. We in the survey we asked about your expectations going into a review specifically, and whether folks thought that they knew what to expect. So I think we had roughly 73% of respondents say that they either agree or strongly agree that they know what to expect going into a review, which I think is a good indicator. But yeah, that was primarily about expectations on going into reviews. But I think you can probably extrapolate that out, and expectations about roles in general probably have an equal effect. And then we have one more really strong recommendation here based on the data, which is that you want to choose review metrics to track and make reporting part of your process. So when we looked at this, the teams that are satisfied with their software quality are overwhelmingly doing reporting. So that means they're they have metrics that they're tracking, they have KPIs that they're looking at on a week-to-week basis. The folks who are not satisfied with their software quality, much more likely to not be doing reporting. I think we had the majority of folks who are not satisfied with their software quality are not doing reporting, and the sort of inverse of that as well. For the satisfied folks are doing reporting. So I think this chart shows those two different correlations pretty strongly. The teams that are doing reporting are, I believe, 5 times more likely to be satisfied with their code quality. So if you're not doing reporting, I think this is pretty solid data to take back to your team and say, hey, we should identify some metrics to use so that we can, track it over time and actually put forth some process improvement. All right, we have another question that just came in. For daily code reviews, do you recommend over the shoulder as part of it? Yeah, John, do you want to take a stab at that?
I can take that one. Based on my experience when I was a developer and working with dev teams, what I would typically see is for kind of feature level changes, they would do code reviews, but throughout the day, they would have other developers doing kind of over the shoulder, hey, does this make sense what I'm doing? And I think the answer is not necessarily one or the other. It's kind of having a mixture of both throughout the day, having people just having someone to talk to. I think there's something like the rubber duck effect, I think it's called, or something like that, where basically pretend you're talking to a duck as you're coding, and it will help you write better code just because you're talking out loud and it's using a different part of your brain. Some silly study that, shouldn't say silly study, but a study found that and used that as a kind of silly analogy to explain their findings. Again, the idea of just mixing both, having those kind of feature level code reviews to have a real in-depth analysis of the code, while also having those over the shoulder, again, hey, Patrick, does this make sense? Am I doing things that I should be doing? Do you see anything that's off right now? And then doing that quickly throughout the day, I think will get you kind of an ideal level of quality and as well as knowledge share.
Yeah, absolutely. And one important thing to point out is that I think we found the majority of folks are doing all of the approaches. I think there's like 55% are doing meeting based, a certain percent are doing ad hoc and tool based. But basically, as a result of that, there's no one rules all approach. Really, it's about frequency and it's about process as sort of those main key drivers there. All right, so that's our last data-driven recommendation. We also have the recommendation that you want to be fostering a collaborative culture. This is something that we sort of preach here at SmartBear, especially around code review and document review. It's not just about using a code review tool or doing frequent code reviews. It's about turning your process into more of a culture. So you have your folks feeling like they own their code, they're responsible, they have sort of an inherent incentive to really be trying their best and collaborating and finding defects, in a collaborative, casual environment that really allows that sort of cross-pollination of information so that everyone understands the code base and that you're communicating in a really sort of positive way. So I think that's sort of our final recommendation with regards to actionable things that you can put forth for your team. But we also do want to show our tool Collaborator. It's a peer review platform for quality first teams. Seeing that the topic of this is code reviews and putting those best practices in place, we just want to show briefly what Collaborator can offer. And Collaborator is the only enterprise-grade pure code and document review tool. So what we mean by that is whether you're trying to review your requirements documents, design documents, user stories, or whether you're trying to do source code reviews, all of that can take place in one platform, and you're able to customize rules and really make your process your own. So I'm gonna hand it off to John. Let him share his screen so we can get into the product a little bit.
Sure.
And we did actually just have a question come in also, which is, does pair programming improve/replace code reviews?
Might I take that?
Yeah, sure.
I would argue it's a kind of a similar answer to the question I just gave, because pair programming will get you one other person's opinion and will help you develop the code to a certain point. But I still think there's a lot of value to be gained in broadening the number or broadening the group of people who are looking at your code review and having other eyes on your code review, especially if you're on a team where you have maybe a couple of more experienced members, some mid-level members, and then a few junior members, giving them exposure that they probably can't get through a pair programming structure to different parts of the code base can be really valuable, especially if when someone leaves the team, right? And that's something that it's a artifact of the software world. People leave teams, they change companies, they take promotions, whatever it may be. I think there's a lot of value in still having that as a part of your process. Maybe if you're doing pair programming consistently and you're very diligent about it and disciplined about it, maybe that changes how you do code reviews and how often you do code reviews. But I just still think there's a lot of value in having that kind of wider code review as a part of your development process, especially when it comes to knowledge sharing and getting other people looking at the code that they may not be familiar with.
Yeah, I think it's all about different benefits, right? With pair programming, you do have that face-to-face interaction, really intense knowledge sharing because you're able to communicate really quickly. And then, but you do sort of lose some of the documentation and automation that you would get with a code review tool-based approach. So I think it's a balance. All right, John, do you want to share your
Sure.
screen? We'll take a look at Collaborator.
All right, let me know if anybody cannot see my screen. I'll drag over Collaborator. All right, so we're going to talk about a handful of values. Well, we've already talked about the values that you can get from a code review, but we'll talk about a handful of ways that Collaborator kind of enables those values. And the first one we're going to talk about is simply managing the code review process. So a lot of times we'll be talking to teams who don't have a code review process. Maybe they're performing email code reviews. They have a very chaotic, over-the-shoulder type method. They're not very disciplined about it. So what they're looking to do is use a tool to bring that discipline into their teams. And by virtue of that, just having a place to perform the code review, keep track of messages and conversations around the code review, and kind of organize things is a huge value add for them. And that's something that Collaborator can provide. So what we're looking at is kind of the very basic minimum requirement for having a code review tool, which is the diff viewer, right? Can we actually compare two different versions of my code, move between different versions, highlight the differences, and then leave feedback on that differences. So I can see here, I can tie my conversations to individual lines in my file, leave a comment on line 4 over here. Right, so I can have my conversations tied to my files. I can leave comments on my files in general. And I can also leave comments at the review level. So if I just have a general comment about the review, this whole review should be canceled because you know what, we need to pull this code out and completely revamp it based on these new changes, whatever. I can do that. And this is going to make it easier for me to keep track of things. Again, I'm not trying to trace down multiple emails, finding who said what when, comparing it to which revision of the code. I'll have all my revisions right here for me in one spot. So I can go through and change which revisions I'm looking at. In this case, I only have 2 versions of this file in this review, so it's not something complicated. But if I had 10 versions of this file, I'd have those versions here. My conversations would line up with those versions. They'd be available throughout the for all versions, but within the conversations, I'd be able to see when a version was added relative to the comments. It'd be like leaving a comment. In addition, these conversations are real time. So if Patrick and I were on different sides of the country, I start my day earlier and I start working on the code review. When Patrick comes in to start his day, he can see the comments I left and he can respond to them then, or we can both have a real-time conversation if we're both working at the same time using these chats. We don't have to like make the code review public or anything like that. We can just both work on it simultaneously or asynchronously. Another feature that, again, talking about those teams coming from a undisciplined, chaotic code review process without really any structure, looking for something with a bit more structure. The other thing that they're kind of looking for is a way to keep up with required changes. So 2 types of feedback I could leave, right? One type would be, hey, maybe next time you want to do this differently. It's just a suggestion. You don't need to make it. We can still approve the code review and merge the code, not a big deal. Or maybe it's a question or just a general comment, something like that. Did you know? That kind of thing. But other times we have a type of feedback where we say, you know what, I can't approve this as a reviewer until you make that change. And that's what we're going to we call it a defect internally, but really it's just a required action item. So I can say something like, please change this on line 10. And instead of adding that as just a general conversation, I can add that as a defect. And the first difference you'll notice is now we have the ability to tag our defect with these custom fields, severity and type. These just happen to be the default custom fields that are shipped with Collaborator, but my team could build more custom fields to get more information about my defects. And then later I can use these tags to perform reporting and understand more about my defects. What type of defects are we finding most often? What's the severity of the defect that we're finding most often? How many high severity defects did we find in the last release? Things like that. So it helps us perform that kind of post-processing work. And the other nice thing about this, if we go back to the idea of just managing a code review, now I have a very visual way of identifying which lines or which parts of my code review have a defect. This will help our team keep track of what needs to be done before we can call this fixed. When I worked with Scrum teams as a Scrum Master, one challenge we often had was someone started a code review and we're in our stand-up and we're asking, all right, so we know that that person was supposed to perform the code review, but are you done? Or how do we know if you're done? This makes it very clear. We can see, all right, there's 3 outstanding defects. All 3 need to be resolved before we can finish this code review. And we know that they were all logged by so-and-so, and we can easily talk about the work that needs to be done to resolve those defects. Makes it just very easy and obvious to have those conversations, saving us time in terms of that daily planning that we're having to do, whether it's Scrum or just natural conversation.
And for teams that are using GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab, and they're sending pull requests, Collaborator can also be sort of used as a quality gate. So by adding those defects and things that need to be changed before the review can be closed out, you can create a code review whenever you send a pull request, and have that code review function as a quality gate, so that once that review is closed out, then it can auto merge that pull request. So it can prevent the scenario of, oh, someone came into the review, said everything was great, pushed it to a merge, and now there's a problem in our code base. So that's another nice thing about having those clearly marked defects in there.
Mm-hmm. One more thing before we talk about some of the other ways that Collaborator achieves some of the values of a code review, is again talking about management and making it easy to manage your code review process. A lot of times I'll be talking with teams and they'll be saying, I can use GitHub for small changes, but when the changes get really large, there's lots of files, large files, lots of people, it's tough to keep track of what's going on with each file and understanding the context of the conversations that are going on within my code review. And this is just an example of how Collaborator can help you here. We're looking at another demo code review, and we're just looking at the materials section. So this is all the files that have been added to my code review. And I can see all the files here. I can see the location where conversations have been started line by line within each file. And I can see what type of conversation and who's participated in those conversations over here. So I can easily see for the file player.java on line 13, this user DC, which stands for developer Colin, has left a defect. It's red, which means it's unresolved. And because this whole line's highlighted yellow, that means it's unread by me. I haven't read it yet. So it's going to help me very easily pinpoint what I should be focusing on and gain context and stay organized.
Yeah, and you can also see below there that we also have documents in this review. So that's another great feature of Collaborator, that you're able to have your requirements right next to the code that's supposed to be meeting those requirements.
Yep. This is just an example of what a document looks like in Collaborator. We're doing the same thing, comparing the 2 documents, highlighting the differences, and giving you that same ability to organize your conversations and changes around those documents. The only difference is, instead of tying those conversations to individual lines of code, we're tying them to locations in the document, because documents may have pictures and things like that. And we may want to say this whole picture needs to change, or this graph needs to change, something like that.
Yeah, Collaborator natively supports Word documents, PowerPoint documents, Excel, PDFs, PNGs. So it really made sense to be able to just drop down a push pin wherever and make your comment there.
All right, the second thing I want to talk about, and I think I'm going to talk about 3 things. The second one's going to be how we can support different workflows. Third one's going to be reporting. But let's talk about workflows right now. Different teams may have different levels of code review that they need to perform. Some teams may require a strict code review, while others require a more relaxed code review. Or maybe different projects require a different way of performing a code review, maybe to meet some kind of internal compliance standard or an external compliance standard as part of a industry certification, something like that. Collaborator will let you employ those different workflows and then enforce them, but also report on them later. For example, in this review over here, we have this concept of a template. And if I switch this template from its current template called default to this different template called Code Review Basic, you'll notice my screen changes. We're going to have custom fields that pop up. Custom fields are going to help us grab data about our code review. And maybe this is data, again, that's relevant to the more strict code review process. Over here, we'll have checklists. These checklists are going to help us ensure completeness of our code review.
And also, another role of these custom checklists is that we mentioned setting expectations and having clear expectations going into reviews. This is a really great way to say, these are the things that we absolutely need to look at to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
And down here, we have our participants. So you can't really see it, but in the background, our rules around the participants have changed. So going back to that example, strict versus more relaxed types of code reviews. Maybe my strict code review, I have to have at least 3 reviewers, and all 3 have to complete the review to call it finished. Maybe my more relaxed code review process, I only need 1 reviewer. And as long as that 1 reviewer calls the review done, then we're done. We can enforce those different types of requirements on the people we add to our reviews very easily. And this is all driven by that template. And this is all very easy to report on. So I can go to reporting, and we'll look at that in a second, where we can grab information from these custom fields. We can grab information about these checklists, who's checked off the checklist and at what time, and who's included in the review and what phase the review's in, and those kind of things. Just a quick note also before I move on to that, I always like to talk about this. We can also make it easy to add those participants to our reviews. We can set up review subscriptions. So I can say every time Patrick creates a review, automatically add John. So we can kind of automate a lot of these processes and build in those time efficiencies into your code review process, so you're not wasting clicks trying to add Colin and add a bunch of people. We can make that a lot easier for you. All right, so let's talk about that third thing, which is reporting. And the first report I'm going to show is actually a report for this review called the Detail Review Report. So again, for reporting, what we care about is easily getting the information out of the system. Typically, we're going to see this in those regulated industries, but we may also see this for teams who are just interested in having that kind of continuous improvement style development process where they're always asking, all right, what could we do better next time? Or what did we do well last time that we want to keep on doing and do more of? Right? This is going to help us get that data to make those kind of decisions, or get that data to show to somebody that we're actually performing code reviews and we're meeting whatever quality standards that we feel we need to meet. This review, or this report, is going to show us all the information about one specific review, how many defects we found, who checked off checklist items and when they checked them off, who was added to the review, what tickets or what work items were connected to this review, for example, in Jira, what defects did we find? And then we'll have some more interesting metrics, like what was the inspection rate in this review? Now, this review is still in progress, so we haven't calculated inspection rate yet. But if it were a completed review, it would show something like 500 lines of code per hour. This would help us learn about the thoroughness of our review, especially if we're using this as part of that continuous improvement process. We may be interested in saying, all right, did we actually perform a thorough review? Should we have more thorough reviews? And how can we do that? And we could use this data as a proxy metric for understanding that thoroughness. Likewise, a defect density. How many defects are we finding per 1,000 lines of code? Using this number, we could learn about our review process. Is it getting better or worse? How should we react to that? And then we'll have a list of all the conversations, who's left those conversations, who's participated in them. And again, tying those to the version that was available or the version that you commented on, so we have that traceability to understand when that conversation was made as a part of the review process. And I will open up the reporting tab, and I'm just going to show one more report. And this is going to be an aggregate review report. So we just looked at one report that gives me a lot of information about one specific review, but now we want to look at one report that gives us a little bit of information about a lot of reviews. So maybe we want to see all the reviews in one particular group for one particular time frame and understand how long on average did people spend on that review. Again, maybe this is for an internal compliance standard. We need to show that people actually performed reviews, and we want to have a time number to back that. Or maybe it's for that internal process improvement. We want to see how long did people spend on reviews, so we could compare it to maybe a different data point and understand if we are meeting our internal growth goals. So in this case, I can choose some data over here, pick average participant time just to go with the example we're talking about. And down here, we can run some filters. Again, we can filter and grab data from those custom fields. So those are coming back up again. And I can run this report. And I probably won't get too much data back because this is just a demo environment. I get a few reviews. But we can see down here, we have our average participant time. Looks like it's about 20 minutes, so people are spending time on these reviews. And now we can share this list, put it into Excel and start creating graphs based on it. Grab a PDF and distribute it to someone who maybe doesn't have access to Collaborator, like those internal auditing type folks. Grab a link of it. Every time I click this link, it's going to run this report. Management may be interested in getting an automated email once a week with this link so they can get a summary of code reviews in their department for the week. Or we can directly query our database. So if we have a tool like Splunk, we can query the database just by grabbing this SQL query that we use to generate this report and start having custom dashboarding in one of those tools like Splunk.
Yeah. So, I mean, reporting in Collaborator really allows you to have all the tools at your disposal to, understand what your process looks like. And then, our report showed the teams that are using those metrics, looking at those review reports, they're able to make those changes to end up with a much better process. So yeah, I think now we're going to open it up for Q&A. If anyone has questions, feel free to enter them into the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer them. I do know that we've run a little bit over time. So if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out by email, and we'll be happy to reach back out to you. So for Collaborator, we do have a free 30-day trial available on the website. All right, we have a question. In the admin pages, you can configure syntax highlighting. However, in the version we have, there's no option for C. Is there in this version?
I believe C is grouped together into the C family of languages. So if you want to have one specifically different for C versus C++, I believe you still have to create a separate one. By any chance, are you in the automotive industry? I don't know if you can answer back via text, because I've had a few requests for a C specific to the automotive industry. I guess there's maybe a few tweaks to it. I haven't fully asked about it, but yeah, we don't have a C specifically, just the C language, no defense. Okay. It's really easy to create these templates. It's also both from a user point of view, creating the syntax highlighting scheme in here and creating custom syntax highlighting schemes, but also for a development perspective, it's not really hard to make these. So if you can get us more information about kind of like what you'd expect to see in a C language template, that's something we could probably easily work into our backlog and get into the product.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And yeah, as I was mentioning, we do have a free 30-day trial for folks who are not already using Collaborator. We actually just launched hosted trials, so you don't even need to install a server, which is kind of nice. Fill out the trial form, and then you should be able to get started. And we also have on-prem trials if you're interested. And we will be sending everyone a copy of the report that we went through today and a copy of the webinar. All right, we got another question. Can you expand on automating with GitHub-like tools?
Sure. You know what? Let me show really quick rather than tell.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to go to GitHub really quickly, and I'm going to make a pull request. And what we're going to watch is my pull request will create a review for me automatically. So I'm just going to make a quick change. And normally I'd be doing this on my local machine and like pushing changes up to a branch, just for the sake of a quick demo. We'll do it this way. We'll create a new branch. And we'll create that pull request. And because we have a webhook installed on GitHub, we'll have that Collaborator review created for us automatically. You can see that over here. We've also set up this particular repo to require Collaborator as a pre-merge check. So I can't merge this code until my Collaborator review is completed. So this is going back to the quality gate that Patrick was talking about. And I can also configure Collaborator to automatically clean things up for me in GitHub. So I could have it automatically merge for me based on a successful review, or I could have it automatically delete a branch based on an unsuccessful review. You don't have to do that, but it's also something you can configure. So that's the kind of automation that we're talking about when we're looking at GitHub. And this is one of our highest priorities in terms of development and spending resources on improvements to the product. So there's gonna be a lot of cool stuff coming out, I think, in the next 3 to 6 months regarding our integration specifically with tools like GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, as well as some other cool things.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Yeah. So if there's no other questions, I want to thank everyone for joining today. Again, we're going to send out the recording and the report so everyone can dive into the details to their heart's content. We want to thank everyone again for joining, and have a great day. Take care.